All right, in Book 27, the British have just run away, and Caesar is not able to pursue them because the cavalry isn't there. So, hostes proelio superati simul atque se ex fuga receperunt statum ad Caesarem legatos de pace miserunt. Hostes proelio superati. Hostes and superati are your nominatives. Es and e are nominative plural endings in the third and second declension. So they're the subject of miserunt, which is the verb there at the end of the phrase. Superati is a perfect passive participle, which you can translate as having been verbed or just verbed. So the enemy, and then proelio is, let's say, an ablative of place, or even an ablative of means. They've been defeated either in battle or by battle, you could say, for that proelio ablative. We have another little phrase there, simul atque se ex fuga receperunt. We just saw the word fuga in 26, flight. Simul atque is sort of a little phrase that goes together. Simul by itself means as soon as, but sometimes it's with atque, and it means the same thing, really. As soon as, se is reflexive, right? It goes back to the subject. Ex fuga receperunt. This is describing they've been in flight and they're sort of pulling themselves together. They're taking themselves back. So they're recovering, maybe a good word for receperunt. And then ex fuga's pretty self-explanatory. Statem ad Caesarem legatos de pace miserunt. Statem, people sometimes get confused with subito. Statem's where we get the word stat, like in a hospital setting. You say, give me 5 cc's of something stat, which is immediately. Ad Caesarem's preposition, to Caesar. Legatos, in Latin they're called legates, they're legatus and legati. In English we have the word legate, but that's not very meaningful to most people to say, oh, they're legates. So you might want to use the term envoy or ambassador. They are, in a sense, messengers, but they're also officials who are powerful, and they have the power of negotiating. So more than a messenger, kind of like an ambassador. De pace. Pace means peace. It's the word pax. But here the book suggests that you give truce. So about a truce. And de is a word people get confused a lot too. In Spanish and Italian we have the word di, which means of, but of course if you're going to say of in Latin you'd use a genitive. De always means either down from, like descend, descendit, or about, like describe. If you describe something you write about it. Mostly it means about. So here this means about a truce. And then miserunt is the thing that the hostes are doing. Obsides sese daturos quaeque imperaset facturos polliciti sunt. All right. If nothing else, we'll start with our verb, because we have to take all the first part a little bit later. Polliciti sunt is, it's not only deponent, but it also introduces an indirect statement. So it looks like it's perfect passive with those two words, polliciti sunt, but you're just going to translate it perfectly because of that deponentness, right? They promised. And then the indirect statement, right, they promised that. So we expect, after an indirect statement, our subject's accusative and our verb is infinitive. That's how we can go back to the beginning and get our actual indirect statement. All of the stuff before that is the stuff they promised. Obsides sese daturos. The sese is your accusative subject, and it refers back to the main verb. They promised that they themselves, and you could just say for this, but there's two of them, say. It's kind of more emphatic. But it means the same thing as just the word say. That they themselves daturos obsides. And because we're expecting an infinitive, we're going to have to assume that there's an esse after daturos that's just left out, as often is the case. The UR of daturos makes it a future infinitive. So they promised in the past that they would in the future obsides daturos. That should figure that one out. And then this part, quaeque imperasset, is the direct object of facturos. And your book uses this phrase a lot. It's a substantive phrase. So that means it's a whole phrase that's acting like a noun. So facturos, there's another understood esse there, that they would do. And then the next phrase is the whole accusative. What are they going to do? So it's acting like an accusative. The phrase, what they're going to, like in English you could say they're going to sing or to dance, but they're going to do quaeque imperasset, whatever he had ordered. So because it's a phrase, it's like that whole thing is now the accusative. So that's what they mean when they substantive phrase. It's a whole phrase that's acting kind of like a noun. So instead of having one word, you have a whole phrase. You see it a lot in things like I want. So if I said I want chocolate, chocolate would just be accusative. But I want to sing and dance the night away while the stars shine above. That whole thing after I want is like the accusative. It's the thing that I want. So the phrase is substantive, is what that's called. Imperasset is a syncopated form of imperavisset. And you can see that that would be a pluperfect subjunctive. Right? So that's what the British now, after having been defeated when it seemed so certain that they would win, they're kind of grasping at straws and promising to give anything Caesar wants, do whatever he wants. Caesar would be the implied subject of imperavisset, whatever Caesar had ordered. Una, with a long A we've seen before, so make sure you know what that is. Cum his legatis. It's ablative, this phrase, cum his legatis. And usually when you have a cum and then people, like legates, it's an ablative of accompaniment, which just means they're accompanying the main subject, right? If I say I go to the store with my friends, then with my friends would be ablative of accompaniment in Latin, and it's also it's almost always with a preposition cum. Not always. It's weird if it's not, though. Okay? Commius atrebus venet. So he's commius the attribation, which is sort of where he's from. We skipped over the part about him in that whole section that we skipped when we went to book 4. But Caesar, in his infinite wisdom and kindness, is going to just remind us who he is. Quem, so whom, supra demonstraveram. So be careful of your tense of demonstraveram in the person. This is first person, which is weird. We've seen Caesar talking about Caesar a lot, so it's kind of strange. He's saying I here. When he's talking about the battles, he's trying to be very unbiased, and he's talking as a general, right? But here he's describing something else that he's written, so it's a little more removed from the battle. He's not saying I fought, but he's saying remember that thing that I wrote earlier. So this is his persona as the author, not as the general, because he's just going to mention himself in the third person. In 2 words, a Caesare, there he goes, in Britanniam Praemissum. Praemissum, it describes Commius in this sentence. Whom I had sort of reported before had been sent, or sent before, sent in advance. A Caesare is going to be your ablative of agent with praesum. When you have a passive verb like having been set out, kompremisum, perfect passive participle. And then you have who does the action after usually an a or an ob. That's called an ablative of agent, the person who does the passive verb. In Britannium. That's where he was sent. Easy. Hunc ili e navi egressum cum ad eos oratoris modo Caesaris mandata deferet. Comprehenderant. There we go. Alright, hunc is accusative, and it refers back to commius again. The thing about hic haec hoc, this, to see it's accusative, you're looking really for the N, not the M. The N tells you it's accusative. Ili is the nominative, so we get our accusative first. Usually that means it's emphasized in some way. Its position is emphatic. So this guy, those guys, they're less important than this guy, who's commius. Et navis egressum. Egressum goes back to hunc, this guy, because they're both accusative. And remember, even though egressum looks like a perfect passive participle, if you try to translate that way, it would make any sense. Egredior means to go out. So having been gone out doesn't mean anything in English. And it's deponent, and that's why having gone out. So instead of being passive, it's active now. And then enavi is just enavi. Cum is going to start a cum clause for us, so we're expecting to see a subjunctive at the end, which there is. Ad eos. Eos refers back to the British. Oratoris modo. Modo means only or just. And in here it's like he's only like he's not there to fight, he's not there to threaten, he's just there to present an argument. He's there as an orator. And he's an orator Caesaris. Caesaris is genitive. Mandata is a great word, especially for Caesar. I know we've seen it a few times now. It's really a perfect passive participle of the verb to order. And it's neuter plural, so it's technically the things having been ordered. But usually, if you were to look this up, it would just tell you orders. But that's why it's really closely related to the verb to order. So the things having been ordered, deferet. And the subject of deferet is going to be commius. So when he had defereted ad eos, the orders. And it's our subjunctive in our cum clause. We still haven't gotten the verb for ili, right? What did those guys do to this guy? And then comprehenderant, finally we get our verb there. So you might have to play around with the order that you translate them in, where you're going to put your cum clause and where you're going to put like your egressum to make it sound the best, but stay closest to the Latin. That can be a tricky thing. So that's what they did. And be careful of your tense of comprehenderant. The tense here really indicates that there's this whole story going on, and now Caesar's taking some time to tell something that happened even before this story. So the British are they're getting themselves back together. And let me tell you about this one time that they had, like kidnapped this guy and they had put him in prison. So it's happening before all this other stuff had happened in the past. Atque in vincula conjicierant, yeah. Vincula we've seen in the Aeneid too, especially there's that one section that the water is so calm that no chains bind the ships and no anchor holds it with a toothed bite or a hooked bite. I think that's what it was. So vincula are chains. And again, the subject of both of these verbs is ili. That's your nominative. So they had done all that stuff. Caesar's just reminding us. Tuum, which is kind of taking us back into the now. proileo facto remiserunt. And proileo facto, I have decided it's an ablative absolute. So we're back to the now the battle's finished. Remiserunt, there's this understood sort of hymn, which is our comius, that they're not going to say. Et in pretenda pace eius re culpam in multitudinem contulerunt. So ablative absolute first, it kind of sets the stage, and then another verb, re miserunt, which is just miserunt re. Okay. In petenda pace, that sounds better. Petenda is from peto petere, to seek or look for, and sometimes it can mean attack. The ND tells you that it's either a gerund or a gerundive, and to decide which one it is, gerunds stand alone. Gerundives, because of that IVE, adjectives. So if it's a gerundive, it describes a noun, and it's going to be the same gender, number, and case. So we can kind of look to see if there's a noun in the same gender, number, of case. And pace is feminine ablative, singular, and so is petenda. So petenda really describes pace as an adjective. So this is a gerundive. That's an easy way to tell the difference between gerunds and gerundives. Gerunds also have very few forms. They're all neuter and singular. Petenda's feminine, so it would have to be a gerundive anyway, because feminine doesn't exist on the gerund. Remember too, gerundives are technically participles. They're really future passive participles, which in English doesn't exist. So they sound really weird. Participle. So literally it says, in peace, going to be sought. Because you get the going to as the future, and then the passive be, sought. In English you'd have to say in seeking peace, which is more of a gerund, actually. Okay, eius rei, both of these are genitive, but they're not agreeing with each other. We'll come back to them in just a second. Culpam is accusative, of course. Culpa means fault, and in English we even have this word mea culpa, which is Latin, which means my fault. In multitudinem contulerunt. So contulerunt's our verb. They remiserunted, and then they contulerunted, which I picked ascribe. It's kind of, it's a weird word, so you have to pick a good definition for contulerunt. They ascribed the culpam, and then our two genitives are going to play off of culpon. Rei goes with culpam and eius goes with rei. The blame of the mistreatment of him. I can say his. The blame of his mistreatment. But eius and rei are both genitive. And sort of in seeking peace, they ascribe the blame of his mistreatment in multitudinem. So here it's just like on the masses, on the crowd, on the lower class. So say it's not our fault, they made us do it. Et propter imprudentiam. So propter and imprudentiam go together. Ut ignosceretur is purpose, and you're going to take it after petiverunt. So petiverunt is that same word petenda we just saw in petenda pace. Peto, petere, petivi, petitus is to look for or seek or ask for. Sometimes it means attack, but usually it means to look for something. And we get the word petition from peto, petere. When you petition someone, you're asking them for something, right? We could petition the administration for food in the classroom, right? We'd have to ask them for that. So they asked, or they sought. Ut ignosceretur, and that's the purpose. Their purpose of seeking was that. And then this is passive. Make sure you make ignosceretur passive. And the subject's really comius. And all these words are defined in the book. I can't do all the work for you, but I can help you out. I think probably this would be a good place to stop and have you guys work the rest on your own. Here's some notes if you want to look at my notes. Questus after Caesar is deponent, so you have to translate it actively. And there's legatis mises is ablative absolute. I don't think there's much good stuff. Oh, for the Dixit, here in Imprudentia Dixit, the book tells you this is hyperbaton, which we haven't talked about, even though we've seen it a lot in the Aeneid. Hyperbaton, hyper means a lot, extra, like too much, and then baton comes from the Greek word for to walk, and it's where we get words like acrobat. An acrobat is a high walker. Acro means high, and bat is walk. So hyperbaton is when you have things that go together, like the subject and the verb, or a noun and an adjective, and they're really far apart. Not normal far apart, like we see in Latin a lot, but like really, really far apart. So the subject of Dixit is Caesar, and we've seen nouns and adjectives and verbs and stuff be separated by a line, but really it's quite a lot. It ends up being 2 lines. So they point this out as a hyperbaton. So we see them in the Aeneid all the time, but really when it's like not just normal far, but quite very far. Paucis diebus later on, and on our page, it's 3 lines from the bottom, is an ablative of time within which. Ablatives, there's 3 time phrases, 2 of them are ablative. You have the accusative duration of time, and then ablative does time within which and time when. So an ablative would be I'm going to go to the doctor in an hour, which is time within which. And then time when is I will see the doctor at 1 o'clock is time when. And then duration of time, which is accusative, would be like I'm going to be there for 3 hours, would be duration of time. So this is going to be in a few days, which is time within which. All right. So the rest of it you'll have to work through on your own. You can do it together and when everyone's finished with the videos.